Okay, welcome everyone to Lunar Alchemy this week. Merry solstice time to everyone. For those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, of course, we're just a couple days beyond our winter solstice. We're in the period where the sun rises at the same place on the horizon each day. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern with the movement of the sun right now. And I think it's a really interesting time because right now the sun is moving through the transit through gate 10. And that leads us to a contemplation of the shadow of self-obsession. And today I'm excited to discuss this topic with Bella, who's here with me as always. If you don't know me, my name's John. And one of the topics I'd love to cover today is what might be kind of a shocking realization about the dynamics between the empath and the narcissist. And we can certainly get into that through looking at Gene Key 10 and what's going on at this time. So, really excited about today's Lunar Alchemy discussion and the quantum healing transmission that we will be offering for all of our members. If you're watching on Facebook, I will post a link in the comments there if you're interested in joining us to receive that. You can click on that in the comments. So, Bella, merry solstice time. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
What's been on your mind this week with all of we had a full moon last Saturday. It was solstice on Tuesday. There's been a lot of movement in the skies. And I think this particular gateway of Gene Key 10 is one that can really bring up a lot of sort of self-reflection. So I'm curious what you've been thinking about, and just would love to hear what's on your mind.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a bit of a wake-up call, and I believe that it's both what you're saying with the solstice and the full moon, and also the Capricorn season. So yeah, asking myself, and I think that's Capricorn sometimes that forgets to celebrate. It's so good at getting things done and building things, and it has this earth aspect and the structures that it's creating. And sometimes it's just forgetting to live and to celebrate. So for sure, I've been feeling that. I also had physically I was feeling the full moon and then the solstice. It is powerful times right now. I just have to say that. And we have, I think we mentioned last week, maybe Pluto and Venus together in Capricorn, in the 61, where we had the great conjunction last year. And the tensions, the values, what we love to do, our values, and a lot of that is, there's a transformation, there is a death and a rebirth. And I'm sure that we all are feeling it. And I believe as well, coming into the Christmas time and maybe seeing family members we haven't seen for a while, like, there's so much cooking. But it feels more constructive this week as we're going into Capricorn. The sun is going into Capricorn than it felt just a few days ago. There's some kind of stability, or, we have this Capricorn, this kind of animal who knows that it climbs the mountain kind of thing. So I do feel more stability and more this feeling of like, okay, let's get organized, and a little bit of this wake up call. I changed my phone, or I had to change my phone because it broke, and the whole backup. First of all, because my Apple Care was not in the States, I had to wait for 6 or 7 days. When I didn't have my contacts, I didn't have everything I usually have. And that just showed me you need to be organized, and you need to have a backup plan and things like that. I couldn't even do banking back in Europe for days, and still I have so there are things, and also that goes into the whole Aquarian age that we're coming to with all the technology. Because if you don't have that, SIM card where you can receive that code from that, I mean, I'm maybe a kind of special case in that way by being so international, but really there is just that little thing that your SIM card expired, or there is something that can't be done if you can't connect to the the grid in Sweden or something like that, and then it's impossible. And you speak to like customer service, you speak to 7 different people, and they understand what you're saying, and they are even saying, I can't click that on my screen, and I'm like, but can I speak to a manager? They're like, no, you have been escalated up. I'm the manager for the European part of Apple. And you're like, and you are the manager for the European part of Apple, and you can't send me a replacement phone in Express that I'm paying for 2 years. It's interesting when the systems and the technology become stronger than the humans and the so-called, the people on the kind of top of the hierarchy for some of the things. And I think that that's what we're going to see. And I know that there are many years ago, we said that AI is going to, they're going to be more intelligent than us. And I think that somehow that's what we're starting to see I don't really see the positive of it. But yeah, I'm sure that there is something, it's an interesting time to live in for sure.
Well, one of the things that strikes me about what you're saying is here we are entering this Capricorn time. And the Capricorn energy oftentimes kind of gets, well, at least from my perspective, because I've got all this Leo and Taurus energy in me, and looking at the energy of Capricorn and the sort of step-by-step responsibilities, the tendency to become serious about the activities that one is involved in. These qualities oftentimes kind of get a reputation for being like the buzzkill of joy, where the tasks that need to be taken care of for life to progress are kind of championed by people born under this energy and those who have strong relationships with that energy. And when we come to the shadow sides of a particular energy, oftentimes it's hard to see the contribution that the energy is providing for us until enough people can peek through that sort of shadow frequency that is just showing us the only way that it is. And I feel like in the particular moment that we're in, here we are between the solstice and Christmas. It's interesting that at least in the United States, maybe in many Western countries or cultures that are dominated by a culture that was built around the Christian traditions, this time period right here, when Capricorn energy is just kicking off and getting started, here we are in celebration mode. And everybody is like, oh, well, this is the holidays. This is like the biggest holiday of the year. We've got Christmas, and then New Year's is right after it. Everybody takes off of work to whatever extent they can. And here we are entering this time frame when the energy of humanity is to move back into a stage of looking at responsibilities and the actions that need to be taken to provide for our well-being in the future. And, here we are in this celebratory time. There's something where these two energies are looking at each other from kind of across a spectrum. And I think that some of that lower frequency reputation that Capricorn can carry has to do with our relationship to how we see it from the context of sort of revelry and merriment and all of the things that we think about. Maybe people sort of indulge in that type of behavior more around New Year's Eve than they do around a Christmas holiday. But you know, this energy of Capricorn coming up right now and then having our celebratory holidays happening, I think is a very interesting contrast to look at. So Bella, I wanted to look at you just to ask you about your perspective on, you know, the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere is the time where the darkness has reached its peak. And starting on Christmas Day, the 25th of December, the sun will begin its march back in towards the north, signaling our return to days that are longer and a return of the light, so to speak. So, you know, we've been doing Lunar Alchemy now for 9.5 months, I want to say, just about. Almost, maybe it's 10 months now. But looking at everything that we've been processing through Lunar Alchemy, I'm curious about how you see this arc of time moving across the year, and where are we at here with the solstice and these 3 days of essentially of darkness, where the sun ceases to move northward, it doesn't move southward, it keeps rising right in the same spot before Christmas happens. What is this? Are we bottoming out? What's going on right now?
Yeah, I'll share the chart so you can look in the wheel, because I think that what we spoke about last week with Christ and that story, you know, whether it's, yeah, however, whatever religion we have, but the way that we look at the symbolism of Christ is important. I want to, you know, when we look at the wheel, where we are is in the 10 right now, and we are in this cusp between Sagittarius and Capricorn. And if we speak about Richard's, the 7 years of the wheel, we are in the very end. He's going to go up to gate 3. It's ending in 42, and this is the way that the wheel goes. And we can see that from a astrological sense too. You start in Aries, and it's about you are born in the world, the spark of you is coming, and then Taurus is about the physical foundation. Gemini, you start to communicate with the world. Cancer, you start to understand how to nurture and maybe, you know, include others and family. And then Leo is kind of your leadership and being on stage. And Virgo is about organizing and improving. Libra is with the other and the relationship. Scorpio is more about the death and the rebirth. So kind of you've kind of lived all through these things, and you kind of think that you have arrived somewhere, but then there is this kind of existential knock on the door that says, you know, maybe everything that you built, your whole identity, is just an idea, and you have to do that spiritual transformation here in Scorpio, and then changing your beliefs and seeing the truth maybe in a different way. And then Capricorn, again, we're building structures, and Aquarius is beyond, like seeing what we haven't seen before. We were speaking about that, I think, last week as well, with Uranus, which is the unexpected and the planet that comes after Saturn that we couldn't even see before we had the telescopes. So here we have a whole new world opening. And then Pisces, it's even, you know, beyond again. But the way that we see it in the 7 years of deconditioning is that the last 2 phases before the 3 is the awakening and the integration. So with all the things that we've already done in the wheel, there is this potential for awakening. And this is where we can see as well with Christmas and the darkening. There is this potential to see beyond what we can see with just the naked eye, or how we maybe interpret death, because there is a rebirth after death. And the Pisces gates are about integrating. And somehow we see here, we have all the solar plexus gates. So where we are now, we have all the root gates. There is something new that's birthing, like deep from the roots, and the little sprouts that are coming up. And then what we see in Pisces are all the solar plexus gates. So all the root gates are here in Capricorn, starting to sprout something. And then the last part of the wheel, before we come back to 42 when it ends, one circle of the spiral, are all the solar plexus gates. And in the I Ching, we are speaking about the fire. So there is something where, when we've gone through all this, we kind of have to sit through all these gates. And that's where we started Lunar Alchemy last year. These are all the emotional gates where there is a purification. I would say it's a fire purification that happens there. So for me, somehow the next few months are the most powerful in the wheel, because there is so much that we have already gone through and integrated. And here we are sprouting something new structures. And we also need to integrate and sit with some of the things that are dying. We have the crisis, the turbulence. Like the funny thing for me is that this is the integration and the last thing of the wheel that we also have in those 7 years of deconditioning. So yeah, I feel like a culmination that is happening, and a lot still before we're done with this spiral. And for me, the new year, the astrological new year, the new year of in a human design sense, a gene key sense, it starts here. So it starts in Aries. That's where we have gone around the wheel.
Yeah. So, it's so interesting to me that everything that you're describing this movement across the entire wheel. And yet here we are in the sun is shining through gate 10, and that energy is reflecting off the moon, sort of illuminating the shadow frequencies of this particular energy pattern. And this particular gene key is really all about the quest of self, and which is described through this cycling around the wheel and all of the energies that we interact with and integrate, regardless of whether or not someone is involved with gene keys in human design or lunar alchemy. These processes are working through us as we interact as a part of the total, the whole, the cosmos. And when we are engaging in the shadow frequencies of this gene key 10, we're not engaging in the question of who am I, nor are we transcending the fruitless, maybe not fruitless, but the futile search for an answer to that question. We are living a definition of conditioned experience. And when we do that, we are going to be trapped or imprisoned by the nature of duality that exists in this universe. So when we're in those types of experiences, the programming partners that are going on between the earth and the sun are going to activate all of the energies in us that are still identified with those particular identities or archetypes. And as that occurs, we experience conflict. We experience disappointment. All of the ways in which we can become aware of shadow frequency patterns are going to show up in our lives. And if we're able to recognize those patterns as they occur as not self aspects, we have the opportunity to transcend them and to create anew in our life, to step off of the cycles of experience. And one of those cycles that I wanted to talk about today that has been discussed a great deal in the last few years is this dynamic of empaths and narcissists, where there's been a great identification of people with their own access to spiritual capability through the archetype of the empath. And this is a beautiful archetype. And Bella, do you remember there's one of the gene keys, I believe the Siddhic frequency is empathy.
The 13.
The 13. Okay. So the Siddhic frequency of gene key 13 is empathy. And when we identify as an empath, what we're doing is pulling an idea about this Siddhic frequency, which is actually beyond identity, and putting that costume on to have a new type of an experience. And no matter where we are on the frequency spectrum, no matter whether we are deep in our shadows or we're living in our gifts, this costume is going to give us a kind of a new flavor of experiences. And this is a wonderful thing. This is part of our evolutionary process. And I don't in any way want to color this as like a negative thing to be engaging with. We all wear our personalities in the world and engage with them, and they are the vehicles through which we are experiencing our human journey. But this costume of the empath, or whatever experiences that allows us to recognize the ability to sense others through feelings, really has absolutely nothing to do with the dynamic of empath narcissist. When we're looking at this dynamic that has been labeled empaths and narcissism, the empath's ability to sense others' feelings has nothing to do with the frequency that is running through them that creates that connection. That connection is fostered through gene key 10. And the two forms of shadow frequency, the repressive self-denial, which is what the empath embodies, and then of course the narcissistic reactive energy of that shadow, which is labeled the narcissist. The reason that these two forms come together is because they are part of the same energetic dynamic. And this is the shocking truth that a lot of people don't want to examine, because we get wrapped up in the positive qualities of empathy. This Siddhic frequency that we can taste and smell and touch to some degree comes in and distracts us from the choices that we're making, which are described in that repressive aspect of this shadow, where we're denying ourselves love, we're compromising ourselves in order to put others, anything that is outside of us, higher and over our own needs. This is kind of like a way in which our search for self, this quest that Gene Key 10 puts us on, it's one of the ways that we can answer this question. I am a person who is developed enough to value others more than myself. This is one of those qualities that gets celebrated in other people, and particularly at Christmas time. Why? Because some of the message of Jesus' teachings was love thy neighbor, meaning to be able to, which has been interpreted as putting the needs of others higher than one's own, rather than recognizing the needs of others as one's own. So there's subtleties in these messages and how they've been received as conditioning and how that manifests into our experience. So, Bella, I'm curious if you have what thoughts you have on that relationship, and if you have something to add to what I've been sharing about that in Gene Key 10.
Well, with the empath and the narcissist, it's a sick relationship that is completely in the shadow frequency. So to say that the victim is the empath is not really true, because it's a co-creation of it's a dynamic that's going on where the roles are that way. So yeah, absolutely. And I am a little bit allergic when I see even those like Facebook groups with thousands of people, and it's about, you know, being an empath. And I mean, I can understand what it is to feel other people's feelings, because I have a completely open emotional center. I have the 13.6 in my radiance. That's why I don't put myself in situations all the time where I take in a lot of emotionally charged material, whether that's a movie or a person. I choose kind of what I take in. But yeah, no, absolutely, it's a dynamic that's, I think it's somehow a more common dynamic than we might think. I think in almost every relationship, there's going to be a little bit of that. And the role is kind of going to be set, who is who. And you're going to notice that you are more prone on taking on one or the other. Those two roles.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting to talk about within this context, because within those social media groups where everybody is like, ooh, I'm an empath, how exciting. You know, this is a wonderful recognition of a human capacity to perceive emotional energy wavelengths. You know, this is something that every human is born with. Everybody's an empath. Some people are more sensitive to that capability than others. But when we look at that, the empath is sort of like this hero who, you know, puts the well-being of others above themselves. Whereas the narcissist, can't tell you how many times I've seen expressions of people who talk about the partner within these relationships as somehow being less than human, as if they were less than human. And I can recognize why that occurs because of the abusiveness of the behavior. And it's difficult for us to recognize in our own natures the capacity for externalizing abuses that we've suffered, especially if we have some kind of awareness of those abuses. This is usually one of the things that causes a person to move into a state of self-obsession, repressiveness. When we experience some form of abuse, we move in tandem with that to a pattern of self-denial, to recognize the pain that one experiences and to completely move in the opposite direction and say, I will never inflict that on another person. But we miss the part where we go another step and introduce a comparative between ourselves and others, that the only redemption for our own suffering is to live on behalf of others, to do everything for that which is external, another person. And, you know, if we can learn to see the narcissist role as simply the same experience, but the other side of the same coin, a reactive nature where the inner suffering has been experienced as anger rather than victimhood, and a need to externalize that, which unfortunately oftentimes in close relationships ends up in a controlling, abusive, you know, form of behavior in relationship. When we recognize that the same wound is causing that behavior as the one that causes us to choose putting others above self, we can recognize the humanity in the entire dynamic. And, you know, Bella, I think it's really a really clear way to look at this energy. You were mentioning how in relationship, oftentimes one person automatically fulfills one role while another person automatically, unconsciously fulfills the other. It really helps us to see and to admit or recognize, oh yeah, there's still shadow frequency running through my system. I'm still engaging in this form of expression or of interaction in some form. And not that that's necessarily a horrible thing, because without this shadow frequency of self-obsession, we would never go on the quest for self-realization in the first place. I mean, how ironic is that? And I think it's really, you know, it's really a key aspect of the gene keys to recognize, you know, Bella, you mentioned it's hard to see where is the positive in this, you know, possibility for the takeover of AI, where the system is higher and more powerful than the human. You know, I think looking at the gene keys is the same way. You know, when we see a shadow frequency, what's positive about it? How can we recognize that? And, you know, Bella, I would love to hear your insight about how do we find the positives in these shadow frequencies? How do we recognize that, oh yeah, if I'm obsessed with myself, no matter how deeply, you know, maybe whether we're engaged in that horrible empath narcissist dynamic, or we moved on to something else, some other exploration of the question, some other of the stages of this self-discovery of who am I, or moving through a rebirth and experiencing our essence energies in the world, you know, how do we recognize those positives?
Yeah, I feel like through what you have said so far, it is clear that the shadow of self obsession is both in the empath and the narcissist. So the empath, it is funny how there is an arrogance, like you're saying often, oh, I'm an empath, I have this ability. And at the same time, there is this identification with the victim. Oh, poor me, I feel everything. So there is the arrogance in the victim. And then in the narcissist, we have this like extremely egoic, you know, they can't even see further than their own little world. So that's the first, that's where they are stuck. And they have like, we know that the G center where we have the 10 has to do with identification. It has to do with love. It has to do with direction. And the 10 is part of the cross of the vessel of love, where we have love of the self in the 10, we have love of spirit in the 25, we have love of the body in the 46, and we have love of humanity in the 15. So here, at the end of the day, what it comes back to is the 10 in its what does it identify with? And the way out of the labyrinth is the naturalness, because it isn't completely natural. Like if you have to think, oh, I'm much better, because I feel the other and I think about the other, and I'm an empath. It's like it's an identification. It's not completely naturalness that you wake up in the morning and that's who you are. It's a dynamic in a relationship and an identification that you have. And the same thing with a person that kind of can only see their own thing. It's also like what they're identifying with. So coming back to the 10 and the naturalness, that's our being, that's who we are. And like you're saying, as long as we are engaging in similar dynamics from one relationship to another, one situation to another, there is an identification with something. And what the 10 is asking us to is that, can you be so natural that every situation you come into, you're adaptable and you are behaving in a way that is allowing you to naturally feel good and just love yourself and empower others to feel like they can be themselves and feel empowered. That's what the 10 does. It feels so good in its skin, so that it's just inspiring and empowering others to do the same. And that's what we can see when we see a narcissist. We can sometimes like shake our heads and be like, how can it feel good to be like that? You know, there is just something that doesn't feel natural and human with the shadow frequencies when we are in our heart. So of course, you know, that's what the cross of the vessel of love is. It's coming back to love. And by coming back to love, our direction is easy, you know, and we don't have to attach to identification, because that's what the G center is about. When we're in the heart, there are no questions marked. We don't need attachments to the me, self, but it's that higher, you know, the higher self gets to express in the world. And that is so inspiring to others as well.
Beautifully said. And thank you for redirecting our awareness to the gift of naturalness, and to connect the gift of naturalness with the dissolution of identity, to discuss our awareness of ourself in terms of an attachment to who we think we are, and how different those thoughts are from the actuality of what we are, and the possibility of experiencing naturalness by simply releasing those identifications and allowing what we are to simply be, which then of course points in the direction of the city of being, which is how this particular gene key evolves from self-obsession into naturalness, and finally the full flowering of beingness. Really beautiful. So for those of you on Facebook, I want to thank you for joining us. We have a lot of discussion with our members I want to move on to because of the connection to this particular gene key. And we're also going to engage in a quantum energy transmission that is designed to integrate and transcend the shadow frequency bands of each gene key as we move through it with the sun's transit. When we experience the energies of the moon, that moon is illuminating for us any aspect of self that we have externalized as separate. That's the definition of a shadow frequency. So if you're interested in joining us in the future, please click on the link. You can engage your solar membership in the Unlock Your Design Academy. We would be very pleased to have you join us. And I want to wish each of you, if you're celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas to you. And if you don't celebrate, I hope you can recognize the significance of that first day when the sun begins its path moving back into the light, and its impact that that day has had on the history of human evolution. So we'll move on now with our members, and we'll look forward to seeing you another time.